Donkey Kong sits among some of the most storied characters in the gaming medium, but there's something that sets him apart. The creation of his first video game is Nintendo's Canon event. This moment in time is the genesis of everything we know the gaming giant for today. If this project flopped hard or went under the radar, it's hard to imagine what Nintendo would be today. Our story begins in 1980. Nintendo has had a string of arcade games hitting the Japanese market. The Game & Watch is seeing a lot of success, and it was time for the company to expand into the West. Minoru Arakawa, the son-in-law of Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, was tasked with leaving home and setting up shop in unfamiliar territory. He made a big bet on radar scope early on, using a big chunk of his operating budget to get about 3,000 units shipped to the West. Like Nintendo's other arcade offerings, this title was heavily influenced by hits at the time, taking inspiration from Space Invaders and Galaxian in this case. The unique twist put on the game was the three-dimensional perspective on display. Radarscope seemed to find its audience in Japan for the first few months, so Arakawa assumed that it would succeed in the new territory as well. He was wrong. Very wrong. The sales team was only able to move a third of the initial shipment, leaving the other 2,000 or so cabinets collecting dust. The problem with having a bunch of extra stock is that the arcade cabinets are gigantic. The warehouse Nintendo was using wasn't cheap. Sending these units back to Japan wasn't a great option. The cost of shipping and handling would be enormous. Arakawa talked to his father-in-law and they hatched a plan. Japan was going to design a game compatible with the Radarscope hardware, then send that game in the form of a conversion kit. The clock was ticking, and the race began to create a game that would revitalize the fledgling Western outpost of Nintendo. As the company searched for new game ideas, Shigeru Miyamoto emerged with something unique. Gunpei Yokoi, the mastermind behind the Game & Watch, would oversee the project, and a group of contractors from Ikegami Tsushinki would bring it to life. As you might expect, the ideas Miyamoto had for the first game he ever directed needed refinement. The template of what the game would become was there, but the earliest iteration of the game had a problem. It was kind of boring. While climbing the ladders would be a primary mode of traversal, one of the team members made a suggestion. What if we could jump? There's a great video from Critical Kate exploring this aspect of Donkey Kong's development thanks to a rediscovery of a magazine article recounting the dev cycle from Ikegami's perspective. The game was originally meant to star Popeye, and Nintendo had a working relationship with King, but problems would arise. While Miyamoto loosely recalled some sort of licensing issue, Norman Caruso found a more concrete explanation in a deposition. Yokoi said the issue was the technical limitations at play. They couldn't get Popeye to look right. All of a sudden, this character-driven game had no characters. I can't overstate how pivotal this moment was. In the span of this one Hail Mary project, Miyamoto went from an artist to a game designer to a world builder. It started with the hero. Miyamoto originally named him Mr. Video, but Jumpman is what made it into the instructions of the machine. His proportions and designs were defined by the limitations of the Radarscope cabinet sitting on the other side of the ocean. He wore a hat. Hair would be difficult to animate. He was given a mustache to give the implication of a mouth in the sprite work. As for his outfit, overalls would be best, as they would lend a clean look to his running animation. Olive oil would be swapped out for a woman named Lady. The ape that was almost a Popeye character got a facelift. Miyamoto needed to create something that was threatening for the purposes of the game's plot, but still approachable. He'd settle on a goofy gorilla, the perfect balance of power and whimsy. He would be the star of the show, with the game tying into his identity. So where did we get the name Donkey Kong? Was it actually supposed to be Monkey Kong, but it was misheard over a telephone call? Well, no. Nintendo would have their employees brainstorm a bunch of names and pick the best one. The winning name would come from Shinichi Todori. As Nintendo's export manager, he would often help when naming projects, so they would sound appealing in Japan as well as the West. For this game, he had a bunch of ideas. We got Wild Kong, Kong Boy, Kong Man, Mr. Kong. Donkey Kong fit the tone of the project best, however. Donkey was the perfect name for a goofy, stubborn gorilla. While the name is iconic today, at the time the American team wanted to change it. They didn't really understand the appeal of the game itself either. As those first swap kits came into the warehouse, NOA employees lamented how different it was compared to the hot games at the time. They didn't know how they were going to sell it, so they put one cabinet in the wild to see what the public would think. The spot in Renton, Washington would find fat stacks of quarters every day. This Donkey Kong game had potential. Work began on getting the Radarscope cabinets converted. In addition to this conversion, the American team would try and rename the characters. While it was too late to change DK's name, they would alter the identities of the other two stars of the show. Jumpman was serviceable, but he would later be renamed before the game was widely distributed. Don James recounts that they based it on Mario Segal. The the lease owner of the warehouse they operated out of. They saw a resemblance, thought it'd be funny to call him Little Mario, and so that's the name that would make it into the brochure selling the cabinets. Another superstar was born. Lady was a different case. She was known by monikers such as Beautiful Girl in the initial materials, but would later get the name Pauline for all the merchandising tie-ins and other versions of the game. She got the name from Don's girlfriend at the time. With the game ready to go, salesman Al Stone and Ron Judy would set out to put Donkey Kong out into the market. This was the make-or-break moment for Nintendo's American operation. Before Donkey Kong came out, Nintendo of America generated $4.7 million in sales for fiscal year 1981. The next year, after Donkey Kong, they hit over $100 million in sales. Donkey Kong would become one of the seminal arcade experiences of the 80s, as well as a launchpad for Nintendo's entire business strategy. They were used to paying companies like Disney or King to bring characters like Mickey Mouse or Popeye into their product lineup, but now companies were coming out of the woodwork to pay them for their IP as Donkey Kong swept the nation. So what made this game so compelling? Now I really need to put on my tourist hat here. I did not grow up in the arcade era. My first exposure to this game and arcade games in general was this strange room in a frantic factory. This legendary difficulty spike in Donkey Kong 64 would be my introduction to arcade gaming. Donkey Kong opens up with Pauline getting carried to the top of a construction site. DK wreaks havoc as he scrambles skyward. Yukio Kanoka does a fantastic job with the limited resources at hand to make Donkey Kong feel intimidating and playful at the same time. It's whimsical and unsettling. Mario starts his journey at the bottom with Donkey Kong towering over him. In what would become Miyamoto's famous method of teaching the player through gameplay in a first level, Mario has nowhere to go but forward. To the left, all we've got is a barrel of oil that catches fire if you linger too long. They spice it up on the second floor with a couple of ladders to choose from and a power-up. There were a lot of points to farm with the hammer, but I was mostly concerned with my survival. Jumping over the barrels produces one of the most satisfying sounds I've ever heard in a video game. The game feels really dynamic with all the different ways that barrels come down at you. I'd feel cheated when they decided to roll down the ladder that I was on, but I eventually learned how to avoid it. For someone who grew up on the 64 and PlayStation, it was insane for a game to just take you out after getting hit once. I remember how I would jam the B button after getting knocked out of the game. Rare really traumatized a generation with this one. While a lot of arcade games featured one stage with different elements tossed in, Donkey Kong had an extra 3 totally unique levels. The small scenes that play in between them tell a simple story, one of the earliest examples of narrative in a video game. What follows 25M depends on what version of the game you're playing. Rare used the Japanese level progression system, taking us to the pie factory. It's actually cement buckets to fit the construction theme, but the people like to call them pies, so they're pies. This one was always super easy to me, but it's cool that they introduce other elements like moving ladders and a conveyor belt. You can also snag Pauline's stuff for some bonus points. 75M is where things get a little wild. There's no music, just the weird sound of this purple thing crashing through the level. I feel like the sound channel can't process music with these other sound effects, so you just get to hyperventilate while strange objects rain down on you. While the pattern of the spring falling is way more consistent than the barrels in the first stage, somehow this is more terrifying to me. This is where all the kids who grew up on Mario would discover fall damage for the first time. Sure, it would ding you a little bit in Mario 64, but you just go to see the Lord if you fall in Donkey Kong. I love this level though. It feels like a prototype of the platforming games we would eventually get on the NES. You can even skip part of the level if you're a real gamer. 100M is the last level where Donkey Kong takes his final stand. We have a very different setup here, where we need to dismantle the structure. It took a while to get the hang of, but I eventually won. Donkey Kong gets a big bonk on the head, and Pauline reunites with Mario. That's one of the things that's interesting about this arcade game in particular. Although I'm an absolute scrub, I have also technically beaten this game. Having a set of stages and a story with an endpoint gives new or unfamiliar players a bar to clear before they start chasing scores. It's a great entry point into arcade games in that respect. There's a sense of accomplishment when you save Pauline for the first time that isn't present in other arcade games that are purely score-based. While Donkey Kong had unquestionable and immense success in the 80s, the competitive Donkey Kong community is alive and well 45 years later thanks to the structure of the game, player innovation, and limitations in computing at the time. High scores in many popular arcade games have outside restrictions. Pac-Man, for instance, has a precise maximum score, a feat which 11 players to date have accomplished. Because there's an 8-bit integer overflow in the software, the game can't load any levels past 255 properly. The end of the game looks like this. In other titles like Nibbler, there is no maximum score. While this might seem to make for a better scoring system, there are pros and cons. While there is still a higher score to theoretically achieve, the game eventually shifts to one about how long you can stay awake. There's a cool documentary called Man vs. Snake that details the process of achieving one of these high scores. This would require over 50 hours of continuous gameplay to accomplish. As for Donkey Kong, the game loops its stages until the 22nd one. It has a similar kill screen situation like Pac-Man, so there is a definitive endpoint to the games. Unlike Pac-Man, the competitive community has not found a maximum score yet. The game has a lot of unpredictable elements, so it's hard to conceive of an absolute maximum score. Donkey Kong players need to constantly adapt to these scenarios and balance the amount of points they can achieve within the time limit of each stage. There are all sorts of advanced strategies like leeching for points by making the game register a jump over certain obstacles, or steering, which can influence whether or not a barrel will roll down the ladder on 25M or go down the girder. The community has even tried to crack the probability of certain stage effects with math formulas. It's pretty wild to see. The scene is still going strong to this day with the third best score ever recorded in November of 2025. The community even theory-crafted a way to move past the kill screen, a campaign very well documented by Cosmic on YouTube. With competitive and casual interests alike, Minoru Arakawa found the hit he was looking for. Although NOA staff had their doubts about the project, it was a quarter magnet, eventually becoming the fourth best-selling arcade game of all time behind Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Street Fighter II. Donkey Kong was such a success that it was reworked and ported to many different systems like the Atari 2600, ColecoVision, Apple II, and Nintendo's own Famicom. The game would sell well on most platforms, adding millions more to the total copies sold. This was the momentum Arakawa was hoping for as Donkey Kong became a certified hit. Objection! April of 1982 would bring some bad news for the young subsidiary. Sid Sheinberg, the CEO of Universal Studios, became familiar with the game's success and felt the premise was a little too similar to King Kong. With the threat of a monolithic Hollywood studio looming, Nintendo prepared for battle. Luckily, they had retained Howard Lincoln. Lincoln didn't believe the property infringed on the classic film, so Nintendo marched into Universal's office to make a statement. While Universal believed Nintendo was ready to bend the knee, Lincoln defied their wishes and stood his ground. Sid Sheinberg was not happy about Nintendo's resistance, telling them he views litigation as a profit center. Universal started shaking down all the companies like Coleco, Atari, and Commodore who had licensed Donkey Kong from Nintendo, threatening a lawsuit in an attempt to collect royalties. One after the other, the majority of them folded and entered into a licensing agreement with Universal. Under Lincoln's guidance, Nintendo would hire John Kirby, a defense attorney from a Wall Street firm, to represent them in court. Kirby was really accomplished. He spent his time in the 60s as an instrumental part of the civil rights movement, building a case for the eventual Voting Rights Act of 1965. When he left the public sector, he began working with some of the top private law firms and representing consumer brands such as PepsiCo and General Foods. That body of work impressed Nintendo, so they would ask Kirby to lead the charge into battle with Universal. As he dug into the case, he would find that this battle was one of many in a decades-old war for the rights of King Kong. You see, King Kong was created by Marion Cooper. He teamed up with RKO to release the original 1933 film, but somewhere down the line, both parties felt they had the rights to license the character for toys in the Godzilla crossover. In the 70s, a battle royale broke out as Universal wanted to remake the film. RKO allegedly had a verbal agreement with Universal, but they argued that the rights to the remake were purchased by Dino De Laurentiis. The Cooper estate then jumped in to reassert their rights that they felt belonged to them. It was a giant mess with everybody suing each other, but it resulted in RKO letting Dino De Laurentiis make the 76 Kong film. The Cooper estate got some of the rights back for the original story, and Universal would later buy those rights from the Coopers. So Universal at this point sorta owned King Kong, right? Well, the problem for Universal was that they didn't have a trademark, as the King Kong brand had no single source of origin. John Kirby seized on this while showing hands-on comparisons between the film and the game. The court found that at best, Donkey Kong was a parody of King Kong, which would be protected under US law anyway. Judge Robert Sweet said, quote, "Throughout this litigation, Universal knew as a result of the RKO litigation that it had no rights to any visual image of King Kong from the classic movie or its remake. Nonetheless, Universal, when it seemed beneficial, made sweeping assertions of rights, attempting to extract license agreements from companies incapable of or unwilling to confront Universal's profit center." Yeah, it turns out the judge heard about Sid Sheinberg's comments to Nintendo. This ruling was a win in Nintendo's sales, so much so that they bought a sailboat for John Kirby. They named the sailboat Donkey Kong, and speaking of naming things, that's where Kirby would get his name. This is what I love about Donkey Kong's creation story. While it is a remarkable game in its own right, It also stands as Nintendo's Canon event, a genesis for so many factors that influence gaming and culture today. With Donkey Kong's chaotic yet triumphant entrance into the game industry, the North American branch of Nintendo was saved. To this day, the Americas account for about 40% of the company's revenue. Donkey Kong itself sits among the best-selling arcade cabinets in history, and it is honored in the World Video Game Hall of Fame. The Famicom would be specifically designed to be the best version of Donkey Kong on console. When it arrived in the West as the Nintendo Entertainment System, that hardware would capture over 80% of market share in the territory DK helped conquer. This game would be the directorial debut of one of the most famous video game designers of all time, and Little Mario would go on to star in his own spin-off series that would grow into the highest-selling video game franchise of all time. They would eventually patch things up with Universal too. In an ironic twist, Universal Studios would be the partner of choice to create and distribute the Super Mario Bros. Movie. They even worked together to bring Mario and Donkey Kong to Universal's theme parks. About 40 years after Universal tried to sue Donkey Kong out of existence, they produced a theme park and movie adaptation of him. Over the last year, Donkey Kong has seen a renaissance between the big screen appearance, theme park launch, and his triumphant return to games with Bonanza. Join me on a series of retrospectives exploring the ups and downs of Donkey Kong's 45-plus year history. This explosive introduction would intertwine DK with Nintendo's history, and he remains an important part of their IP portfolio. Join me next time as we explore Miyamoto's follow-up game, Donkey Kong Jr.